I would like first to express my thanks for and my gratitude to be able to participate in this very important conference that relates to the future of our civilization, and for the opportunity which is given to me to express my opinion on this problem. I have called dimitude the special type of relationships that Muslims have established with non-Muslims in the religious, political, and social domains. These relationships are based on the Quran and the Sunnah. They are mandatory and regulated by the Sharia. They implement the Islamic conception of the world. What I call dimitude is called by Muslims tolerance, but I prefer a concept which expresses the Judeo-Christian and Western point of view on this condition. It is my opinion that with massive Muslim immigration in Europe and probably in other Western regions, dimitude, that is the traditional religious and historical way Muslims relate to non-Muslims, have emigrated to the West. There are many reasons for that. Some have been touched upon by a distinguished lecturer before me. First, it is the obfuscation of this subject, the difficulties to discuss freely on Islamic matters because of fear, because of threat, and also because of the accusation of Islamophobia, which is never agreeable to receive. I will just give a few examples of this dimitude in the domain of the perception of history. For instance, it is religious history and profane history. Alors first, the religious history. Is the whole humanity born Muslim? Because this is the way Muslims think of the human being. In this case, are we apostates? And this here I join with Robert to say that infidels, those who refuse to acknowledge that there are Muslims, they know Islam is truth, but nevertheless they continue in their error, represent the worst of evil. So are we apostate for the Muslim who comes here, and also for the billions, I think 1.5 billion Muslims outside of Europe? It is important that we realize that, how they see us. Do we have, if we are not apostate Muslim, what they see as our identity? Do we have an identity, a religious identity? For instance, they deny the truth or the existence of the biblical history. For them, for Islam, the whole biblical history and all the figures in the Bible are all Muslims, including Jesus, who is a Muslim prophet who preached Islam, and his name is Isa. So, in fact, this is the reason of the Israel-Islamic conflict, that the Bible and the reality and the history of the Bible is not accepted, and that the Muslim says that nor Israel, nor the Jews, nor the Christians have any root in the land, in the Holy Land, because before Islam, before Judaism and Christianity, and before the Bible, the population was Muslims. So our religious identity is therefore denied. the denial of the Bible, including the Gospel, deny the Jewish and Christian identity. And we can ask ourselves, is Christianity rooted in the Muslim Jesus, in Isa? In this case, Judeo-Christianity does not exist, as it has been said several times by several politicians and theologians. It doesn't exist. It is a fake, because the history of Judaism and the Bible is a fake, and of course also the Gospel. And Christianity belongs to Islam through Isa, and it has to come back to Islam, to its roots. Wow. And we see that this extreme militancy, Islamic militancy, which is working on the churches, the Oriental churches, which are like hostages in the Islamic country. So I would say that if Europe has renounced to recognize its Judeo-Christian identity, it is because it thought that Turkey will come in, and Turkey refused that identity, and also it is in order to accommodate the Muslim immigrants, because they refuse the Judeo-Christian identity of Europe, and they will never integrate in such a Europe. Now, about profane history. Is jihad a genocidal war? This is according to our own criteria, Western criteria, or it is just a sacred duty performed to suppress infidelity according to Islamic criteria. So the Alliance of Civilization and the Annalyn Foundation and European governments have chosen the Islamic version. We should not discuss nor criticize jihad, and I think this was said also, that we cannot use certain words. Jihad enters in the lexicon of forbidden words because they offend Muslim sensibilities. So we have to accept what Muslims consider a just war, and which is according to our criteria. It is a war of annihilation and destruction against us, and we have to say that this is a just war, and we are forbidden to criticize it. Now, is Islamic religious slavery a taboo subject? We know that we discuss, and this is very good, we submit to historical criticism, racism, racist enslavement. But why not doing the same with religious enslavement, which is inscribed into the laws of jihad, which has been performed since the beginning of Islam, and is continuing until now in Africa, and which has a much more bigger geographical extension and temporal extension in history. So why can't we speak about that? It is another taboo subject. And what about imperialism and conquest? Muslim imperialism, because we cannot speak about Muslim imperialism or conquest, because Muslims believe that when they are conquering lands, when they are taking lands, they take lands that belongs to them, because they have been promised to them by Allah. And what they do when they perform jihad, it is to go and take back their own land that the infidels keeps illegally. So what they are doing is a defensive war to have their own right on this land. And when the infidel fight them, it is them who are aggressive. It is always the infidels who are aggressive, and the Muslims are fighting a self-defense war. So now we cannot discuss about this problem, and we have to accept. We have to accept the Islamic vision on their conquest. We don't discuss about Islamic imperialism. And now about relativism. Has Europe a civilization? According to the OIC, this is the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which brings together 56 countries, and according to the Annalyn Foundation, Europe and the West, with the Muslim world, form one single civilization with a diversity of culture. We cannot speak about different civilizations because this implies a clash of civilizations. So we are together in one civilization. But now the OIC requests that Europe recognize the immense contribution of Islamic culture and civilization to Europe's development, and that it includes this subject in school and university syllabus. So in fact, our Western civilization is an Islamic civilization. We don't have a religious identity, we don't have a history, and we don't have even a civilization by our own. Now, what about the perceptions of right of European in relation to Muslim immigrants? We are constantly reminded by the OIC, and particularly at its 2005 Mecca Symposium, that we have to feel guilty. Guilty because of the crusade, guilty because of imperialism, of colonialism, and this biggest sin of all time, the restoration of the state of Israel. And this is exactly what they say in the recommendations in international relations done by this distinguished OIC summit. Address the moral obligation of Western powers which directly or indirectly contributed to the injustice, oppression, aggression, and long-standing disputes involving Muslim peoples, and assist in raising the socio-economic standards of the poor countries in the South. The South is the Islamic South. So, because we are guilty toward the Muslims, we must pay for the cultural and economic development. And this, of course, costs billions and billions of EU euros, and without any control. Now, this is a moral and fiscal duty that dhimmis have to perform. So in Europe, we must provide also the immigrants, this is the request from the OIC, we have to provide them with adequate lodging, education, schooling, health services, good salaries, and show deference to them. And this was also addressed by a speaker. We have to, therefore, we cannot use certain words. These are the lexicon of forbidden words. And we have to train civil servants and doctors and teachers who are in contact with Muslim immigrants in order to teach them not to offend Muslim sensibilities. And what about multiculturalism? We are told that we must accept multiculturalism even though we do not want it, because European national identities and values are all Islamophobic. Our government should suppress these values, our identities, from Europe. But what is Islamophobia? According to the OIC and its report on its second report on Islamophobia, 2009, European national identities, anti-terrorist measures, and the refusal to accept illegal immigration are a racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic obstruction to multiculturalism, because immigration ought to continue indefinitely, notwithstanding native opposition. European restrictions on immigration are Islamophobic. Muslims suffer from discrimination, and this has been said several times at the Council of Human Rights. Muslims suffer discrimination in Europe because of two major problems: Europe's security imperative and European national identities. But what the OIC demand from us, and what is their request to the EU and to the European Commissions? The Islamic presence, says the OIC, is irreversible and definitive, and Europe must restructure itself into a multi-ethnic and multicultural society. The OIC declared in several of its statements that Muslim immigrants in the West are part of the universal Ummah, and this is in its charter of 2008. And because it is part of these European immigrants, Muslim immigrants, they are part of the universal Ummah, it is the duty of the OIC to protect them and safeguard the religious and cultural heritage of their home countries, Muslim home countries, in their host countries. So they have the right to protect, to keep, and the duty to keep their religious and national and historical identities in Europe. And the OIC has to protect that from any form of discrimination, oppression, and exclusion. Muslims, say the OIC, have a shared identity that would be forged in the West, particularly in Europe, through the mandatory knowledge of Arabic, the language of revelation, and the Islamic faith, and through the learning of Islamic history and civilization. This will be provided, this learning, this teaching will be provided by the coordination throughout Europe and the Western world of a vast network of Islamic teachers, schools, institutes, and universities that would spread this teaching, Islamic teaching, from the cradle, accompanying men and women in youth and adulthood throughout their working lives, providing the necessary support by planning an educational, cultural, and social program. And this is done by the ISESCO, one of the main body of the OIC. Now it is being done. And of course, our European governments have accepted ALLthat. Now, teaching immigrant Muslim children the greatness of their heritage would allow them to realize the fullness of the borrowing from Islam in every aspect of Western civilization. That means that we don't have a civilization. Every aspect of Western civilization is in fact Islamic. Islamic identity would govern and organize every facet of life of the immigrant and would define both behavior and interpersonal relationships. This is a quotation. Such planning ought to strengthen the presence of Islam in the West, activating the role of Islamic culture, and safeguarding and immunizing Islamic identity against European influence. As a conclusion, I would say that Europe is considered to be a vast area for colonization, a continent in which nationalism and native cultures and identities should be eliminated, as were those of non-Muslim inhabitants of land Islamized after the jihadist conquest. Because this is the view of the Muslim world, and we are not going against it, we are not fighting against it. Our EU apparatus, in the contrary, through several transnational and international networks and lobbyists, are working and collaborating with the OIC. Now Europeans are obliged to live as in wartime, to submit to searches on public transport and in public places, while the OIC multiplied the number of international conferences and dialogues, including at the UN, complaining of European Islamophobia from which Muslim immigrants suffer while they continue to flow into Europe from their own will. Like Dimis, Westerners are obliged to accept the demographic and cultural colonization of their own territory. They have to renounce their national history, identity, and culture, as well as the right to defend themselves, because this is Islamophobia. Anti-terrorist measures are Islamophobic. So we are in a culture and in a political system of dimitude without knowing it. And we can ask ourselves if all these numerous dialogues and lobbies and alliance of civilization, and Alliance Foundation, and so on, are not in fact a conduct for dawah, this is predication, and if it is not also a way for the OIC to impact and to bring its own views within the European system. In fact, we have internalized the Islamic view on us through these international networks and which in fact are ruling us. Because as it has been so well explained, the Europeans have lost the control of their own democracy, their own system. This is done through opaque networks, faceless, which take decisions that no one controls, like for instance the Euromed Parliament, which is one of these networks, and which impact on our policy without us knowing it, on matter of education, syllabus, on everything, on immigration, and in making us feel that we are guilty and we have to pay, and that we are racist and xenophobic, as many of my friends here know it, because they are the victims of these accusations. Thank you.
Thank you very much about the comments you made on European guilt and the expectation of European guilt reminded me of the new book that's just come out in English by Pascal Bruckner, The Tyranny of Guilt, which, if any of you haven't got, I'd very much recommend. Which describes very nicely, as you did, the way in which all Western-born non-Muslims are responsible for everything that was ever done by any Western-born non-Muslims, and yet no Muslim is ever responsible even for their own actions. And if anyone's any doubt about that, the existence of that rather neat tie-up, the Guardian newspaper just 2 days ago ran an article on the suspected Times Square car bomber with what I thought was, even for the Guardian, a pretty good headline, which said Times Square suspect suffered mortgage foreclosure. Which I'm sure you'd agree with me would suggest that America is ripe for hundreds of thousands of car bombings in the current climate, and that actually this isn't a problem of jihadists trained in Pakistan, but Fanny and Freddie problem. At least they know where to apportion blame. Anyhow, I'm sorry to abuse the chair, but I'd like to invite Paul Marshall.